Once upon a time, in a bustling market located at the eastern part of Nigeria. The market was known as Machine Parts. It was a place where different motorcycles and their parts were sold. Among all the traders in this market was Mr. Ken. Mr. Ken was a very tall, handsome, and jovial man. He was always with a smiling face. His friends named him a man of good heart. He was mainly known for his act of philanthropy. He helped everyone around him. All his friends are associating with him because of his free spirit. He was the type that when he went to the pub or club with his friends, he would always pay for everything that they consumed at the place. It didn't matter how much was involved. It continued until Mr. Ken wanted to travel to China. It would be his first time traveling. He wanted to tell his friends, but his mother advised him not to say anything to anyone until the time comes. So he hid his mother's advice and began to save into his mother's account. He didn't tell anyone. At first he noticed his friends' detachment. He noticed that their behavior changed a little bit. He wanted to tell them about his trip, but then he thought it over. None of them had asked him anything. They hadn't even bothered to ask him why all the goods in his shop were being reduced without replacement. As good friends, they owe him such. They were supposed to ask him, to know if he was having problems in his business. So because of this he concluded that he wasn't going to tell them about his plans unless they asked him. Then came the most terrifying thing that happened to him in his life. It was like a routine for Mr. Ken and his friends to hang out every weekend. But on this particular weekend, Mr. Ken called and called and called his friends, but none of them picked. He calmed himself down, telling himself that nothing was wrong even when he knew that something was wrong. Because he knew that something like that had never happened. He didn't know how 3 of his friends refused to pick up his calls. On Monday morning he met them at the market and questioned them, but they all said sorry, with one excuse and the other. They knew who Mr. Ken was. He was a man with free spirit. So without asking for more answers, he joined them and life continued. Then another weekend came and the same thing happened. They refused to pick his calls. He went over to their house to check on them, but their doors were locked. He was confused. When did they start going out without him? It had never happened. He left quietly. He didn't call them back again, and they didn't return his calls either. It was left as if nothing happened. Mr. Ken wanted to leave it that way as usual, but not anymore. He met them and demanded an answer. He wanted to know why they didn't pick his calls and the reason for going out without him. He was surprised when one of his friends opened his mouth. "Ken, what exactly are you going there to do?" he asked. Ken was surprised. He didn't know where the question was coming from. So he kept quiet, waiting for the one that asked the question to answer it himself. "Ken, the truth is that it is no longer that time. We are no longer on the same level, and you have to understand it," another of his friends said. "What exactly are you people saying?" Mr. Ken asked, confused. The 3 of his friends locked their eyes and let out a slow, mocking laughter. "Ken, it is no longer that time. Don't you have an ear? Everyone in this machine parts market is talking about you. People have found out that you no longer have anything. You have finished all your money." It hit Mr. Ken directly on his chest. He stood dead staring at them, moving his eyes from one person to the other. Was that the reason they started treating him like nothing? Because they thought he had nothing. Then he followed suit. "See guys, I might not have anything now, but you all shouldn't forget how I have been shouldering all those expenses when I had money. The way I used to pay for the ones you all ate and the ones your girlfriends ate. I never complained." One of his friends laughed and clapped his hands. "That was your problem. You spend extravagantly. You spend as if money were leaves. You spend without checking your balance, and you have seen where it landed you." Mr. Ken opened his mouth to talk, but his mouth produced no sound. He left it agape. "You were always carrying yourself as if you were the richest man in the world, and we left the expenses for you to carry alone. At least you have seen where your arrogance has landed you," another said. "Arrogance? How? When?" Mr. Ken nodded his head vigorously and gnashed his teeth. "Is that what you people are saying? Is this how you all decided to treat me after everything I did for you all? Just remember that the downfall of a man is not the end of this life. That I don't have today doesn't mean that I won't have tomorrow. You were never forced to do those things, so do not blackmail us, or do you want to drag us to the ground with you? Even if you make it tomorrow, you will still spend it extravagantly." Without saying another word, Mr. Ken left and went inside his shop. There he clutched his cheeks with his palms, deep in thought. When it became too much, he picked his bag, locked his shop, and went home. That night Mr. Ken stood in his corridor, staring outside the sky. The reality had hit him. He had made a list of the things he wanted to buy for his friends when he traveled to China. He thanked his God for his mother's advice. And as he was about to enter the house, he remembered his mother's words. A friend that can't stand with you at your trying time is never your friend. Now it was crystal clear that those his friends were never his friends. They were always around him because of what they were getting from him. He regretted the amount of money he had spent on their weekend hangout and clubbing. For years he had carried it as if it wasn't heavy. He had done it because he believed that friends were supposed to stand with each other. But look at him now. They couldn't do it for him for just a month. Something he did for them without complaining. Then another thought stuck in his mind. So that was how they would have left him without looking back if truly he had lost everything. Jesus! He screamed. People were wicked and heartless. He remembered the way they used to praise him all the time. And the way they used to come over to his house every Sunday to eat Sunday rice and stew. And then they would be praising him, saying that he cooked more than a woman. All those praises were for their own gain. Never because of love. Never because of friendship. The bond he thought they shared was an illusion. The next day Mr. Ken came to the market, dropped his bag in his shop, and went over to the food cellar station. Many people were there buying their breakfast. When it reached his turn, he was surprised when the woman stretched her open arms towards him. I said put food for me, Mr. Ken said, and to his surprise, the woman shook his head. Give me money if you want me to put food for you, the woman said with a serious expression. Mr. Ken was dumbfounded. What exactly was happening? It had never happened like that. The food sellers always move around after selling their foods to collect money. And what baffled him most was that he had helped this particular woman when her son was sick. Like he was the one that paid for her son's hospital bills. Was that how human beings behaved? They forget about what you did for them in a twinkle of an eye. He stood there watching as the woman dishes food for people without collecting money. So why was his own different? He let out a gentle cough and said, If you don't want to put food for me, please tell me. The woman turned to him angrily. Ken, please give me money if you want food. I won't be the one feeding you in this market. Everyone knows that your shop is empty. You aren't doing anything in the market again. Please leave my food station if you don't have money. The woman snarled, attracting more eyes towards Ken. Ken left the woman dejected, and starting from he began to hear about the gossip and rumors going around in the market. To the extent that one man in the market that knows his parents had put a call across to his father to tell him that his son had lavished and spent all his money. Hawkers had found out that he had nothing left. Everyone in the market was talking about it. Some sympathized with him while others mocked him. He accepted everything in good faith, both the mockery and empathy. But whenever he sat alone in his house, he would always let out a loud laugh. He knew that what they would be waiting for was the day his landlord would throw him out of his house. And just like that, people stopped seeing Mr. Ken in the market. People said that he had moved to another state. Others said that he had gone back to his village. While many said that he was running from those he was owing. But what they didn't know was that Mr. Ken had traveled to China. They didn't know that his life was about to change for good. Or perhaps had changed for good. One Monday morning, a guy ran towards one of Mr. Ken's friends with a smartphone. Is this not your friend, Ken? The guy asked. This is Ken, but where is he? Ken's friend said. Are you asking me? Can't you see that Ken is in China? China, how? Ken's friend asked, wiping his palms on his face. I am supposed to be asking you that. Is he not your friend? Jesus, I can't believe this, he said and left with the phone. He went over to his other friends and they all stared at the phone. Gasp and murmur erupted among them. They all stared at themselves. They tried to call Ken, but his number wasn't reachable. They sent him messages on WhatsApp. Ken read their messages, but didn't reply on any of them. 2 weeks later, Ken came back to Nigeria. His friends tried to go back to him, but he sent them away. Many that insulted him tried to apologize, but he never listened to any of them. The woman that insulted him because of food tried all her best to find his face again, but he never gave her the opportunity. He had learnt his lessons, and he wasn't ready for another mistake. The key word was spending extravagantly, and he wasn't ready for it any longer. Months later, 2 containers loaded with machine parts arrived, and they all belonged to Mr. Ken. It was a massive turnover. He had decluttered all his bad friends with their bad energy. The machine parts market was never the same after the news of Ken's success spread. The same traders who had mocked him now spoke his name in hushed tones, their voices laced with regret and envy. His old friends, those who had laughed when they thought he was finished, tried desperately to reach him. Messages poured into his inbox. Calls came day and night. But Ken was too busy becoming greater. In Shanghai, he had found opportunities beyond imagination. At first, life in China had been tough. He had arrived with little more than his determination, a few connections, and the bitter lessons of betrayal fueling his drive. Mr. Ken put all his energy in his business, managing his warehouses, learning the supply chains of international trade. He observed, studied, and connected with the right people. There's no time to club and lavish money with fake friends. And from the day the containers arrived, Ken continued to grow more and more. He had learnt that some people were always around when the road was smooth, and not when it got cracked. Lessons. Making friends is good, but who are your friends? Are they like Mr. Ken's friends? Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel.